Okay, good morning. Welcome. I am Polly Trottenberg, the newish dean of NYU Wagner. Thrilled to welcome you all here for this incredible event, and especially thrilled to welcome some students here from Fannie Lou Hamer Freedom High School. We're so glad you guys are here to be part of this really important discussion. Today, we're going to learn about the work of the Bronx River Alliance and the Stop the Bronx Expansion Coalition, highlighting their recent win, and I think a lot of important lessons learned as the state rolled back what was called the traffic diversion structure. And I think our panelists are going to take us behind the scenes, I think, for some powerful lessons on advocacy, community storytelling, data-driven advocacy, on-the-ground planning. And the conversation is going to talk about public health, environmental, and transit equity. I have to say, I brought for today, as I like to do, some props, both signed copies. I don't mean to brag, but that's how I roll. And look, as this, I'm sure many in this audience knows or will learn today, the Cross Bronx Expressway, the Sharon Expressway, the highways in the South Bronx are among the most infamous in the country. The brainchild of the famous power broker, Robert Moses. And for those of you who know, in this book, one of the most heartbreaking chapters about what can be done to a community. The highway was built with no concern for the long-established working-class immigrant mixed-race communities like East Tremont, Morris Heights, and University Heights. It's now estimated that highway, and I think a lot of these estimates are probably low. We'll hear from the experts. Displaced maybe as many as 60,000 residents, and those people were given no voice or agency in what happened, and we're going to talk about that transformation today. Homes and businesses destroyed, neighborhoods split in half, all the things we know. And now, interestingly enough, as those highways have been all around the country, and I'll just make a little plug here. Some of you know Deborah Archer, an extraordinary scholar here at NYU, has written a book about the larger phenomenon nationally, and I'll make a plug. She will be here to give a book talk on February 25th. Hope you all can come to that if you like this topic. She's fantastic. But now these highways, which did so much damage to communities all over the country, immigrant communities, communities of color, of course, now they're all aging out and need of major repair, and the challenging questions about how do we undo the damages of the past, how do we transform and reconnect and reimagine these highways, and how do we do it with the people most affected on the ground leading the way. And those are the people you're going to hear from today. As former transportation commissioner here, I got to be involved in some of those debates, both up in the Bronx with the BQE, and they are challenging and important. And I'm so excited for the panel we have in front of us today, an extraordinary group of visionaries and leaders. Our moderator, Renae Reynolds, executive director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign. I'm going to mention them all, then give them a hand. New York State Assembly member Amanda Séptimo, Siddhartha Sánchez, Executive Director of the Bronx River Alliance, and Tiffany Ann Taylor, Vice President for Transportation at the Regional Plan Association. Let's give this incredible panel a hand. And Renae, I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Trottenberg. Actually, give a round of applause for the Dean. Thank you so much for hosting us today. So I am the Executive Director of Tri-State Transportation Campaign. We are a multi-state advocacy organization that advances campaigns to improve the policymaking and design practices of our transportation system. And we have, been a key partner in this campaign for improving the Cross Bronx Expressway and making sure that it aligns with the community vision, because these are the folks who have been most impacted by its presence. So this is a political story, right? This is about how communities build and deploy power in policymaking practices to win against sometimes seemingly more powerful actors. So we are going to explore some questions around how and why we were successful in beating back a plan by the state DOT to significantly widen the Cross Bronx Expressway, where we are now, and what comes next. So we have an extraordinary panel to walk us through this conversation, but I want to take a moment to do a little bit of level setting, context setting with a few slides just to orient us in place. So I think we can move to the first slide. Right. So as Dean Trottenberg, this is infamous Robert Moses, and so the Cross Bronx Expressway is synonymous with the mistakes of Moses's planning process, if you want to call it that, or approach, very top-down, inflexible, extraordinarily racist, short-sighted, and ended up resulting in the destruction of thriving neighborhoods and coinciding them with disastrous long-term consequences. Next slide. So alongside his history of destruction, there has also been a robust history of community resistance, and most recently leading initiatives to repair these harms, including planning for a new vision for the Cross Bronx. Sorry. Next slide. So, known as Reimagine, this positive vision has been crafted over several years and is distinct from the Five Bridges project, which New York State DOT pursued in parallel. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot I had the clicker this whole time. The power was in my hand. Oh my gosh. Was this the one? The slide before. Oh, now it's not going back. Thank you. So the principal purpose of the project is to replace or rehabilitate 5 bridges that are at the end of their useful lives in an elevated section of the Cross Bronx at the cost of about $900 million. However, as an unnecessary add-on, New York State DOT proposed to build a nearly 1 mile long elevated truck grade structure to facilitate construction. So post-construction, they proposed to leave it for 80 years, billing it as essentially a permanent gift, I guess, to the community and securing $150 million in federal funds to do so. So the win. So we're here to talk about what we were successful in doing is removing that feature, the traffic diversion structure, from consideration. So, but despite this significant victory, New York State DOT is still proposing to widen the Cross Bronx Expressway in this area with 3 different versions of the widening plan being considered through the environmental assessment process. So here's just a visual of the Cross Bronx Expressway in its proximity to the Bronx River houses and how much closer that arrow at the top shows how much closer a widening would bring it to this residential community. And we know that this would inevitably lead to increased traffic and air pollution. And so now that you're all probably on the edge of your seats, I'll get started with the conversation. And I think we have some rotating slides to just help situate us further. So I want to toss the first question to everyone on the panel. Can each of you just give us a little bit of background on yourself, your organization, sort of why you're in this struggle and what you're fighting for in reimagining Cross Bronx? Start with you, Tim. Sure. We'll go down the line.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. My name is Siddhartha Sánchez. I'm the executive director of the Bronx River Alliance. We are a 25-year-old organization that serves as the coordinated voice for the river. Over the past 25 years and really building on a 50-plus year legacy, we've worked to restore, reclaim, and care for the Bronx River and all of the green spaces along the river. That really means that we are out there looking to create these spaces to mitigate the harms that Robert Moses left in this community, and really to leverage the river and these green spaces for the betterment of our communities, of watershed communities. So economic betterment, health impacts, recreational benefits. We do this work because we want to benefit a community that has been, in particular in the heart of the South Bronx where the river is, starved for parks and overburdened with infrastructure that is not really equitable at all. I come from doing this work, spending my career really resourcing and supporting the vision, the grassroots visions of groups in the Bronx over the last 20 plus years. I've done that from different places. I've done it from government, from philanthropy, and embedded in as a consultant with different community groups. And yeah, I think my role in this has really been to support strategy, support pulling people together, but really one of many powerful voices against the vision that this community can continue to hold and should be overburdened by even more infrastructure, in particular highway infrastructure. So I'll just leave it at that.
Assembly member.
Hi, I'm Amanda Séptimo. I'm an assembly member. I have the honor and privilege of representing the South Bronx in the state assembly. But I think my first identity is as a South Bronx resident. I grew up in Hunts Point, and when I think about my background and sort of forming the core of who I am, it happened at the Point CDC, which is an organization that's focused on social justice, environmental justice based out of Hunts Point. And fun fact, when I was in my teens, I was Sid's intern at the congressman's office. And so really I've had the privilege to understand from a really young age the world through an equity lens. And it is impossible to live in the South Bronx and not look everywhere and see the direct immediate impact of inequity and injustice. And as I sort of grew into my work and grew specifically into my work in government, when you're in government, it is very clear that these injustices are not just happenstance. They're sort of deliberate decisions that get made. And it's very clear that the South Bronx just pays the price of decisions that are made to spare other parts of the city and state. And I think every day that's sort of my guiding light. Oh, I didn't know there'd be pictures, but I love this. Every day that's sort of my guiding light, just recognizing that for whatever reason, I wasn't there, but for decades, there were decisions that were made. There were leaders that let those decisions happen. And it feels like my charge is to really just be fighting for justice, specifically with an equity lens through policy and how it manifests itself in the Bronx. And because of shared struggles, I just have to mention, I'm wearing a pin today in solidarity with CFU and UAW, who I know are working on a contract sort of situation here at NYU, and I hope that it gets worked out soon. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, they're used to me now.
She's a professor.
Since I teach here. Thank you for joining us. I know it's 9 a.m. on a Friday. I'm Tiffany Ann Taylor. I'm the Vice President for Transportation at an organization called the Regional Plan Association, also known as RPA. Very quickly, RPA is a 104-year-old civic nonprofit organization focused on quality of life issues in the tri-state area, so New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. You just heard me say 104 years, so that means we have a lot of baggage. I carry it everywhere I go. It's very heavy. Part of that baggage actually is throughout our history in many different ways, we intersect with Robert Moses quite a bit. There are parts of his legacy that are absolutely influenced by ideas that my organization had at the time. And there are parts of his legacy that were prevented because of ideas and realizations that we've had at the time. So I do want to call that out. And it kind of also explains why I'm here. I'm an urban planner by trade. Previously, prior to working for RPA, I worked for the city of New York, both in passenger and freight transportation, which is a little unusual for transportation planners on the policy side like myself. And so it's any opportunity to engage and have these conversations about why are we widening highway infrastructure anywhere in the tri-state area is something that I think RPA has a real duty to participate in. And RPA is an organization that I call it unusual, but not in a negative way. I say that it's unusual because it's rare that things that are that old are still incredibly relevant, that people still care about and want to attach themselves to or want their brand to be attached to. And that's very much the case in my day-to-day job. And I think layered on top of that is I am a Black woman. I am a child of immigrants. And so I've lived my life through that entire lens. And that's also how I do my work. At RPA, I am the first and only Black woman and person of color to have ever had my job. So in 104 years, I think that's a tremendous responsibility to show up genuinely in spaces where, for a historically white and historically male organization, that now with my expertise and my lived experience, I can participate in conversations genuinely, and I can bring insight and opportunities and translate cultural nuances intelligently back to my peers so that our work, our academics, our research, our technical expertise can really shore up the advocacy. Because unfortunately and I know my fellow panelists can relate, for people of color, for women, for folks who feel underrepresented or othered in many other ways, unfortunately, our anecdotes, our stories about lived experiences are not often taken seriously or are not enough. And so many times we have to support that with technical knowledge, with data, with video, with audio, right? I think the atrocities that are happening across our country are unfortunately not unfamiliar to many of us in those categories, but the difference is it's just on video, right? And so now there is a different fight. There are different stakeholders. There are different parties that want to participate and fight back because there is more validity to the things that many of us have been saying for years. So the last thing that I'll say about RPA, and also where my lived experience ties into, is that we are very visible publicly. Many of you have seen me speak quite a bit. I teach here. I honestly teach the urban transportation class here. Some of my students are here, so it's good to see you. But we're also very nimble and very important behind the scenes. We have a very long history of bringing stakeholders together, having direct conversations with elected officials, commissioners, agency heads, other political change makers, because sometimes you need that closed door coverage to have real honest conversations about what is the challenge and how do we actually address it together. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today, but I just wanted to set the stage as to where I come at this from personally and also on behalf of my organization.
Thank you all. And there was a slide that just came up before this that showed the depth and breadth of the coalition partners. I want to ask Siddhartha first, can you bring us back to essentially the starting point of this campaign? When did you first hear about the traffic diversion structure, and what was the immediate response?
Oh, it's interesting because the name or label of traffic diversion structure was actually the second iteration of branding that the state used to advocate for the proposal to build essentially a second highway over the park through the community closer to public housing. Initially, it was the multimodal community connector, um, which
Sounds nice.
was really, really just bold, to say it, as politely as possible. We were, as you mentioned, really wrapping up years of work to reimagine the entire Cross Bronx corridor. And we realized that this active capital project that had been fully funded and was advancing was not just branded in a really deceptive way. The entire presentation and the way that the state was talking about it was actually taking from the reimagining process and intentionally confusing not just elected officials, but community groups. And it was, it was, as I stepped into leading the organization in April of 24, this was we were in the middle of this. We were in the middle of correcting this perception issue and writing, the reality and really making it clear that what is being proposed is absolutely the worst possible solution. It only centered construction. It only facilitated, vehicle traffic through the neighborhood and eventually would lead to more vehicle traffic, more VMTs, more pollution in the community. When I first saw the drawing, I just, I couldn't fathom how in 2026 we were still talking about building completely new highways, especially because I have some perspective on other highways, the BQE, other struggles, and it just felt like other communities would never even see this as Plan Z, and this was Plan A proposed for the South Bronx. But yeah.
And I'll toss it to you, Assembly Member. As a resident of the South Bronx, like what was your initial reaction to this? And then as a member of sort of the political body, how did you decide, like, I'm going to be a champion for this fight?
Well, as a South Bronx resident, it is every time it's just as shocking. I wish I could say that, like, you get used to it. Oh, you put on your boots, another fight. But it's actually just as shocking every time. I see teenagers in the room from Fannie Lou Hamer. Thanks for being here, guys. But I was that age when I started in this work, and I'm 35 now. A full 2 decades later, we are fighting issues that are exactly the same. And so it is shocking that we're still in a place where policy refuses to step away from the notion of continuing to burden the same communities, continuing to ignore communities that are really fighting and screaming at the top of their lungs to say, this is unacceptable. Yet still we're sort of confronting it again. And as an elected official, this is my job. And so deciding to be in champion, it really wasn't even a decision. It was like, okay, we're going to fight tooth and nail. One thing I'm willing to do is sort of fight till knuckles bleed. And that is something that I learned at the point, right? And with that have come some really incredible victories, like the Sheridan Expressway conversion, like the defeating of the Hunts Point jail. And so I'm really proud of those experiences, and I'm really grateful that I got to have them young, because it's made it so that the really important thing I think about the South Bronx is that we don't win every fight, right? But we put up a fight every time. And that matters, because I like to think that, obviously, I think it makes it so that we win some of these fights in a big way. But I like to think that at least people think once or twice more before making these decisions. And I will say, just recently, I got a call from the governor's office about, I just realized I probably shouldn't say it publicly, but but a thing that was not great, and environmental impact that would not be great. And they said, hey, we just want to know what you think. Can we move on? And I was like, if you'd like to move on, you will have a war on your hands. And they were like, great, that's good to know. And so even having that process happen now feels like progress. And I, stay tuned. I hope they don't do the thing. But even that sort of, it feels like a modicum of progress. And so it's an automatic reaction to say we have to step up and fight, because I think that's the only way things will ever actually change, is when you have leadership that is willing to demand change and not willing to relent for any reason.
And I think the South Bronx is also synonymous with tenacity, right? You have to confront these kinds of elements. So Tiffany, I would ask you, like, we're talking about, we're setting the stage, we're getting ready to fight, we're getting ready to get in the ring. And I think one important thing to engage in that kind of battle is to know your opponent, right? Know what you're up against. So this is a really technical sort of structure, the engineering. I imagine that there are so many arguments to be made from the agency side about the validity of doing something like this. So what are some of the technical elements of or the challenges of engaging agency when a proposal like this is put forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I want to start off, though, by saying advocacy looks different depending on what side of the table you're on, right? So we are largely having a conversation about community strength, right? And who is in the community, who is the stakeholder, is it the nonprofits, the electeds, et cetera, et cetera. But there is also advocacy that can happen on the inside. And if you know anything about me, the bulk of my career, I've been able to say and do things and create things and advocate from the inside of government. And I think that's really important. You need to understand as a practitioner, what is the language, what is coded language, what is complicated, what's technical, what's standard, what's an opportunity to rethink how budgets work. What is it? What is the timeline of a project have to do with an election cycle? Like you need to or and what's the difference between the city budget and the state budget? You need to know how to write a grant. You need to know how to read a grant, right? Like all of these technical things that it's great that we're at a university that teaches those things. You need to learn them as part of the fight. And I think also for some people, they're either not comfortable or it's just a personal preference, and that's fine. They don't want to fight for the outside from the outside. They are not an advocate in that way. They'd rather do the work on the inside and find ways to advocate. And so I think that's where RPA has really come to this project. I can't share the entire story because I promised to protect this practitioner's anonymity. But we, just as part of a regular part of my role, I pay attention to what is happening in the region. And I'd ask them, like what's happening with Reimagine across Bronx? Because that project was actually 2 years. It was very extensive, it was many layers of community engagement, and the report hadn't come out yet. And so I just said, is there a way that we can be helpful, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, actually, it's okay. The report is on its way, but there's a project that the state is doing in the interim of this project, and it would be great if you would essentially pay attention to it. And that's how we've come to it. And so we've been able to, we have an engineer, and she's also a planner, my colleague, Dr. Rachel Weinberger, but we have a civil engineer on staff. We have an urban designer on staff, that's Christine Garner. We have other research analysts. We have the technical expertise to literally go through the very thick standard and legal government documents, to go through the appendices. We know where we're going. We know how to read an executive summary. We know how to read, air quality and what particulate looks like, et cetera, and pick out those questions so that we could then go to the state and talk essentially engineer to engineer. And I think also because of our more recent history and our work, we're also really good at giving explainers, at visualizing really complicated projects, at breaking things down without insulting people's intelligence. And so I think the way that we talk about what a reimagining could and should look like, and down to the very simple things of what is your regular line of communication with the community. I think sometimes when you're in an agency, especially a very big agency, you don't realize that the very small steps you may take to make a big decision, the communication of those small steps is actually really important. You're just focused on delivering the big decision. But when you do that, which was very similar in this instance, as Siddhartha mentioned earlier, the community feels like they didn't get a chance at all to participate, and they feel like something has just been delivered to them. So we had these, direct conversations where we were like, okay, tell the community this is the hearing date. Tell the community this is how long they will have to give comment. Tell the community you're reevaluating the rendering because there's not enough Black and brown people of something that's an image of representing the Bronx, right? Like those small things that might seem like almost insignificant actually are incredibly significant. So I say all of that in a roundabout way to say, like, RPA's role has been very much, in between. Like, we are a trusted space with advocates directly and community organizations directly grassroots on the ground as a source of technical expertise in being able to read complex documents. But we're also a direct connection to government entities themselves so that we can translate the technical documents, the community needs directly to the technical documents and also still speak their language.
That's amazing. And I think, you know, an extraordinary resource for folks who are getting ready to build up on strategies on the outside, right, of the outside game. So we're talking about a structure, a big concrete structure, but this is not all that encompasses the entire ecological landscape around it, right? So Siddhartha, maybe you can talk a little bit more about what was at stake for the community, talking about the context around the ecological and environmental impacts had this initial vision come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to start my response to that question by framing a little more the history that we are building on, right? The truth is that, as you see in some of the images in the slideshow, the Bronx River was a toxic waterway, if you could even call it a waterway, for many, many years, decades. And the truth is that for, you know, over 50 years, community has come together, has advocated, has pushed, has physically gone out and cleaned up the river. And when we haven't been able to physically remove what's in the river, we've brought in the Army Corps, we've brought in DEC, we've brought in other stakeholders to make sure that we do this restoration work in a comprehensive way. The river is a symbol, and I think, you know, we spoke about the tenacity of our communities, right? The reality is that what was at stake when the State Department of Highways, because that is a better way to describe them, put out their vision for what should happen over these 5 bridges, the reconstruction of the 5 bridges. What was at stake was really not just that 50-year legacy, but everything around it as well, right? It was about the river. It was about the parks. It was about the air. It was about the noise. It was about the stormwater. And it was about the dignity and the respect of the people who fought so hard to create this oasis, this place, this escape from this, you know, concrete urban jungle that is in so many ways, you know, part of the psyche of our folks, right? And so it was very, very personal to attack the community in this way, to propose this without even thinking about, you know, where we are and the context that we're in. And I think, you know, I speak about the parks in, you know, the river regularly, but in this case, I was able to tap, you know, my history of work really around asthma and air quality and climate justice, and the reality that what was being proposed was not just about the river and the wildlife and the recreational programs that we run on the river, the cleanups, the park, the soccer teams that use the fields, the basketball courts, the playgrounds. It wasn't just that. It was the 3,000 residents that live 100 feet away from the Cross Bronx, the seniors, the immigrant families, the kids that go to the ER every week, right? Like not once a year, but every week. I was one of those children that had to be carried in my parents' arms to the ER to get an injection because asthma was so devastating. I grew up next to a highway in Upper Manhattan, right? And so to me, this opportunity and this insult really was really significant because it set the tone for not just reimagining, but what I said at the one reimagining, one of the final reimagining workshops was we have to reimagine the implementation of reimagining, because if we're not talking about how we're going to implement this vision, then we're losing opportunities like 5 bridges to implement the vision, right? And you know, it felt like the reality of spending $1 billion on this project while, you know, getting community excited about what else could happen, how we could put parks on top of the Cross Bronx, how we could put, you know, filters on top of the Cross Bronx, how we could improve air quality while rebuilding the Cross Bronx. None of that was on the table. We weren't even talking about reducing traffic. We still are not talking about reducing traffic. We weren't talking about, you know, connectivity, even though the $150 million federal grant was about connecting communities divided by highways. So the state, you know, co-opted our language, but didn't, in fact, with integrity, mean to reconnect communities besides more highway infrastructure. I'll pause there because I'm getting a little fired up.
You get no, you're getting me riled up. I'm ready for the next rally, actually. So I want to ask our assembly member, because it's got to be heartening for the community to know that they have a champion, someone who understands where they live, who understands, what's really at stake, and who's ready to throw down for them. So can you talk about the political landscape, right? And, obviously you're amazing, and and we know that we need to build power in order to confront what is essentially a David and Goliath fight. So how did you, in your position, help to strengthen, the community's position, whether through a partnership with other elected officials, and your ability to pursue another kind of inside game?
First of all, you're very kind. Thank you. I think the clearest answer, honestly, I forgot to mention this. This is not in my district. And that matters, right? Because in the state, it is very well understood that like you are going to go to the mat for your district. They will call you about your district. They will do all of those things about your district. It's very different when you're talking about someone else's. And one of the things that happens is that the state sort of perks up when someone from another community is tapping into a fight. And my colleague, Assembly Member Emerita Torres, also sort of wrapped her arms around this fight. But she'd just recently been elected. I think she might be in a year soon. And so the fact that she was more recently elected, I sort of came in as someone with a bit more experience in these kinds of fights. I've been in office, I'm working on my 6th year now, sort of lending that solidarity from an elected perspective. And we had some of the conversations about how we could sort of good cop, bad cop. And I certainly was comfortable being the bad cop. And I think that was one part of sort of building solidarity and power. But the other part was the very intentional, visible decisions to come stand with community. I went to a press conference in Brooklyn because there was sort of a parallel between this issue and another issue that they're dealing with in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is not down the block. But making that decision to go to that press conference and every other one, good timing on that photo, every other one that I was able to make it to, so that the state also, that's sort of an invisible signal that you send to say, we're attuned, we're sticking with this issue. Every time this issue comes up, you will have to answer to all of us. And I think that's another really important part of sort of building that collective power. And then I think with respect to community, I think when you say community, it's funny because like I feel like you're talking about me. And so it's funny to sort of talk about myself and community because I think we're in community. And I think that's what's powerful, actually, that we all are in the same community and we all just try our best and think creatively about how to use every single tool that we have in that moment to bring it to the fight. But at that presser that I went to over at Cross Bronx, right near the houses, the Bronx River houses, one of the tenant leaders there, I know her because, you do this work, you know people. And she was like, oh my God, Amanda, thanks for coming. And I was like, of course. But she was surprised, right, at the notion that an elected from a different area was going to come in and stand on this fight that in theory is distinct from another community. But again, to know the South Bronx is to know that we're all fighting the same fights and we have that shared history. So I think that concept of collective power, showing up for each other when it's unexpected, is good for building community power, but it certainly signals to the state like, okay, this has the power to snowball and we better think twice.
Okay, so I have a few questions and I think I'm going to complicate them a bit by trying to put them all together. Well, not all of them, but a few of them. So I want to put it to the entire panel to tell me, how the hell did we win, right? And you can answer this in a few ways, but one of the things I want to understand is like, what were some of the key moments that you were like, oh, I can see that the wind is shifting in our favor? Maybe some key stakeholders that you think were, pivotal in that win. And then, if you can, incorporate the importance of communication, right? Information sharing, storytelling. And I'll let you do with that what you will.
Um, well, it was a group effort, and I don't say that lightly. Um, and it's really important to emphasize, if you are not already hearing the theme, that it's a multi-pronged approach. There is no silver bullet to these things. I think especially as a transportation professional, you have to be careful of any kind of idea of a silver bullet. It doesn't really exist. There's also not a silver bullet technology either. I just want to put that out there because people forget. So I'll touch on a couple of things and definitely leave space for my co-panelists. I think for sure being visible and bringing the conversation directly to the commissioner and the executive chamber was absolutely key. And every single person on this stage, their affiliation has a completely separate and distinct relationship to both the executive chamber and both the state DOT commissioner. And so there were conversations where Tri-State had that we didn't have. There were conversations that RPA had that Bronx River Alliance didn't have. Obviously, with the assembly member, her engagement looks completely different. But all of them were really important. And they weren't, at least from my perspective, I never felt like we were using, when we shared information, that we were trying to be shifty and like play against each other and then play the commissioners differently and then play executive. I never felt that that was the case. I felt like what we were doing was using our expertise and our relationships and our experiences to provide multiple lenses of understanding and communication so that those folks could hear it from different ways. And I think the other thing that you have to remember is that New York City is used to being the center of the world. I'm sorry, I said it. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. But it is one city in a state. It's just a few counties in a state. And so for us, Cross Bronx, BQE, those might be issue 1 and 2 that city DOT and state DOT should be prioritizing. But from the state's perspective, those might be issue 10 and 11, right? And so I think it's important to also, as you're having these conversations, recognize that their vantage point and their distance between what's happening on the ground and what ultimately is happening with the governor and her decision making is that they're not able to get those nuances. And that's why our multi-pronged approach was really important. And I think the other thing that I will say is not just that community stakeholders were galvanized, but how they were galvanized. I won't steal Sid's thunder, I promise. But just in communicating what the technical documents said and how to read them was actually really important as part of this conversation.
Yeah, I think I like the framing of this as a multi-pronged approach. I thought of it as local, citywide, and regional throughout the process, and each layer of it being so critical. Just to start with what you were sharing, Tiffany, I feel like the reality of the technical partners, of the importance of the technical partners in this struggle can't be understated. And it's not just the engineering and alternatives and what's feasible. It's also the strategy and the experience of, what do the powers that be pay attention to? What will resonate? How can we say this in a way that they can hear and that they can respond to? So, I want to start by, acknowledging that technical layer also comes with that experience and that inside knowledge that we didn't have, right? But we gained over the course of a couple of years. And, the truth is that it took a lot of coordination, a lot of of communication. We're not built to do this work, right? We're built to advocate in other ways, and we don't have the team to do this work. We somehow did this work, and you know, there were costs and opportunity costs for sure, but what we learned along the way is that because we weren't built for it, we had to learn and coordinate and talk, and you know, we had several meetings a week for years, right? And you know, we had each of those spaces had different purposes, different, you know, things that we were looking to emphasize. Beyond the technical, you know, I think I'd like to emphasize the grassroots, because that is who we work with on a day-to-day, right? We are an alliance of many, over 100 partners that believe in what we believe in. But the heart of our work is the community, and the closest to community, to the local residents, are the grassroots organizations, some of which are in the room: Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, Fannie Lou Hamer, Freedom High School, and working closely with the grassroots, with the community gardens, with the elementary school, with the people in the neighborhood that use the park, that use the fields, that live in Bronx River houses and NYCHA houses. That changed it for us as well, because it wasn't just a one-way education piece. It was a two-way conversation around, you know, listening and learning how we can speak to the different priorities of our grassroots partners, right? And I think it took education around induced demand, some of these technical terms, right? Because everyone knows that Cross Bronx is really just a parking lot. So of course, adding lanes is something that you would think solves the problem, but in reality, we're creating more of a problem. And so it was, you know, we understood that there was an educational piece to this at the grassroots level and a learning piece for us. And then I think there's a power building piece to us that came later in the campaign, as we partner with El Puente, as we partner with Catskill Mountain Keeper, as we work with folks in Buffalo, also fighting, you know, health over highways, highway battles, billion-dollar highway projects across the state. So those three, I think, layers are, you know, what I would name. And you mentioned, or you asked about, like, what point did I feel like we were really, you know, I think personally, to me, when I saw the bilingual pamphlet that Samara Elementary School put together, and maybe this is not everyone else's perspective, but for me, when I saw that fourth graders and fifth graders were getting it, and were standing for it, and were marching in the park, and drawing a pamphlet to distribute to their parents and neighbors, I was like, oh, we're getting it. We're building power at a local level. At a broader level, I think when we had the State Department of Highway Commissioner show up at our office and announce in August and say, we're committing, you know, millions of dollars to studying the implementation of reimagining, and we're taking off the vehicular options from the Five Bridges project off the table. This was in August. We were pleasantly surprised, and also, you know, that wasn't enough. And the truth is that we kept fighting, right? And we're still fighting, because even what the state is proposing right now is not addressing, you know, the issues. It's still expanding, and it's still a problem. You know, the status quo is unacceptable, is what we've always said. And anything we do has to mitigate and improve on the last 70, 80 years and all of the hospitalizations that the highway causes. So I think, you know, noticing power coming to the table, noticing grassroots power, you know, building and expanding, and then also, you know, the fact that we were able to win together. I think, you know, in October, we got the news that the second highway was taken off the table, that we were going to look at just, you know, a standard, quote unquote, highway, you know, rebuild project, which is still an expansion according to the state. And then the shared use path, that was in October, but it happened at the same time that other groups in our coalition, in our statewide coalition, got news, right? And so it was clear to us that we were not just influencing, you know, decisions in the Bronx, but influencing decisions statewide.
I will be brief on this one, but I think, when did I feel? The truth is, I never did. I am, and maybe this is where I'm jaded working in politics, I am never surprised by people's ability to make the wrong decision. And so I, like, until it's done, it's not done, because people stun you every time. But I will say there, and I pulled up my quote, we had a September press conference. It was after the commissioner had come, and I was like, oh, so Sid, I will say this is on my district, right? And I have 500 things that I'm sort of balancing at any given time. I'm in law school. I've got a lot of stuff going on. So I sort of tag in and I say, Sid, give me the latest. And this has happened a few times. And so then we say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z. Okay. And I'll go do that and we'll come check back in. And so had one of those kind of like, what's the latest? You mentioned the commission. I don't know if you remember this, but mention the commissioner stuff. Good news. Okay, great. When the commissioner shows up and is still saying that they're doing the very bad thing, which is that ramp, that was alarming to me, actually, because we just exerted a lot of pressure. We'd spent a lot of capital at that point. And so it was like, okay, we've got to get ready to ratchet up because for whatever reason, they think we're serious enough to merit a visit, but not serious enough to merit a change. And that was alarming. And so when I couldn't make it that day to that presser, but I ended up moving something so that I could. And I remember making the conscious decision to ratchet up language at that presser. And I sort of kind of, when you run for office, you will see that you can sort of black out when you're talking. And like, I can't tell you exactly what I said. I can tell you the theme, but exactly how I said it, no way. But there was an article and so then later I learned about what I said when I read my quotes in the paper. And Streets blog, there was a lot of great press there, and Streets blog was there and quoted me saying that, you know, one of the things that the state was mentioning in their need to keep this is that getting rid of it would expand the timeline of the project by 2 years. And so again, asking the Bronx to pick up the brunt of something that's supposed to be better for everyone else and be damned with whatever the consequences are. Fundamentally unfair. What is 2 years when you're talking about kids going to the hospital? What is 2 years in the grand scheme of life? Nothing. So I was quoted saying 2 years is a small price to pay for all of the harm that we will be avoiding by eliminating that part of the state plan. I want us to work together and I want us to save time. I want us to be efficient, but I could write you a dissertation about all the ways we waste time and money in our budget. And I'm here to say the Bronx is worth it. That was, thanks. Thank you. But that was doing a few things, right? That was naming that concept of trading time for Bronx lives was absolutely unacceptable, and that we would talk about it in that way, in a way that was that strong, that made clear that the government was choosing to turn Bronx lives into something that feels disposable for the sake of time, in a budget where we gave $1 billion to the Buffalo Bills, right? In a budget where I won't write you the dissertation now, but I promise you that I could. And so that was a choice. And also to say, this is going to get hot. One thing that the state pays attention to is press. I know that they were going to read whatever we said that day. And so this was also a signal politically, like, this is going to get hot. This will feel painful, and let's not do it. So I think that I didn't have a moment where like we won, but I had a moment where I was like, let's go.
Okay, so we did win, right? Or at least we won we won a battle, but this is a war, right? This is a war against highway expansions. What is next? Looking at you, Tiffany, because obviously there's still a process, an ongoing process going on in terms of like the timeline. Where are folks still needing to be activated? Where are we now actually? Like, where are we now in the process, and what comes next?
Yeah, so you gave me the easy question. That's fine. There's a couple of, I'm gonna say where are we now and talk about it in a couple of different ways. So technically, the most recent thing that has happened in the project timeline is public comment window was open, which I don't know how we didn't talk about it, but let me just say it now. So the public comment window was comically at the most inopportune time in that it was over the holidays. So I think when were comments due, like the 9th, January 9th or something like that. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine what that was like for everyone. Although to be fair, the state did give 15 extra days, but still the final deadline was at the end of the holiday season. So all the, everyone, including RPA, community stakeholders, have submitted their comments, and state DOT is reviewing them, right? And so there's a little bit of a waiting period in that. I think in part of the waiting on the outside is keep talking, keep having the conversation, keep making sure that this is not a project that, oh, you had a win and now we can move on. No, let's keep eyes and ears on this. Let's be completely cognizant of the fact that we have a new mayor and that this is also a gubernatorial election year, and make sure that you understand the dynamics of that, because to the Assembly member's point, folks really do pay attention to media hits. Sometimes your audience is many, sometimes your audience is one. And always remember that. I think another piece is, and this is something, if you've heard me talk about the BQE, I say this similarly in that there is an aspect of change and improvement to these projects that actually lies way outside the physical project we're talking about. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is we actually also have to start talking about why we're using these roadways in this way, at this capacity, at this volume. What are the decisions we're making or not making that are forcing higher usage of cars and trucks on these roadways? What are the policies? And some of these things are squarely within the jurisdiction of state and city DOTs, and many of them are not, right? Many of them are at their sister agencies or at just like different levels of government altogether. Maybe they lie in taxation, maybe they lie elsewhere. But what is our opportunity to change our culture about why we are depending on roadways to move people and goods in these neighborhoods? What decisions can be made so that we can reduce the vehicle miles traveled, right? The VMT, as Sid said earlier. What are the decisions that we can make earlier in the process, further upstream, that can start to reduce our heavy reliance on these roads? And so that, I think, is also, so that calls for not just a plan for roadways citywide, but a plan for roadway usage statewide, and also a plan for roadway usage regionally, right? Because the Cross Bronx and the BQE are designated freight routes, right? So that means freight is not only just coming to New York City, it's also going through, right? Through outwards towards Long Island and also up north to New England. So this is a multi-layered conversation of which the challenges presented by acute projects like rehabilitating the Cross Bronx are a symptom. So what is next in the immediate is keeping the story alive, keeping the conversation alive. But also in the medium and long term, it's what is our decision making and what values do we hold in terms of how we want to start to reduce this reliance on our roadways.
Okay, I think we have a few more minutes before I toss it to the audience. I want to try to ask two more questions. And my first question is to Assembly Member Séptimo. Actually, yeah, Tiffany brought up the political moment, right? What is the political opportunity here that you want to make sure that folks who don't get it just yet, maybe the governor doesn't get it entirely, right? What do you want to them to understand about what is at stake for them, and what is the opportunity they have? What do they have an opportunity to take advantage of? I don't know. Like,
Sure, yeah. I'll be brief because I love a good Q&A, but it's an election year, right? Like that opportunity is clear. I do think it's a little bit different now that it's a bad time to be a Republican. And the governor doesn't have a primary challenge, right? Those are all real political dynamics that were not true in the fall when we were able to win this. And so always a bad time to be a Republican, for the record, but that was true then. But the dynamics were very different in the fall in terms of electoral prospects. So I will leave that there. I think the other very real opportunity is that the world is changing. The world is changing. New York has changed. Our country is changing. And with a shifting ground comes opportunity to lead. There is just disruption in the air right now, and that extends to political systems, but it also extends to how we think about work and how we do it and how we pursue it, how we advocate. And frankly, I think the most important thing that's happened right now in terms of the world completely changing is that everyone says the quiet part out loud now. That means people who are on your side and people who are against you. And that means that we have to be brave and be willing to say the hard part out loud. And one of the things that I was saving in my pocket for this fight, if it was to go further, is the reality that like that highway expansion wouldn't have served anybody in the Bronx, right? That would have been put there to serve communities north of the Bronx that happen to be whiter, that happen to be wealthier, and that happen to vote, to be more vote rich when it comes to elections. And that couldn't be a reality that we continue to ignore. That's a quiet part that we never say out loud because it's a little uncomfortable, because no one wants to believe that that's actually how policy gets made, but it's just the truth. And we have to live in the world that we live in. And we're striving for a better world, but we have to contend with reality. And I think part of fighting fair is naming those parts of reality that are hard. And part of fighting to win is making sure that those parts of your reality don't get overlooked. So that's, I think, the biggest opportunity right now. Tell your truth, say it loudly, don't be afraid to name the things that feel uncomfortable and that feel hard, because things will never change if we don't.
And then I think my last question would, I'll start with you, Sid. What is the biggest lesson learned from this chapter of the fight? What do you want the audience members to know? Like, what nugget could you leave them with?
I mean, I think I started to imply this or reference this earlier with another response, but this is a struggle, a fight that is just beginning. And we've had a great start. We've won a battle. Reimagining was a nice exercise, but how it gets done, how it gets built, how we rethink, to Tiffany's point, regional solutions and everything from how do we rethink the root causes of this problem, I think is really what is at stake. I know that for us this year, what it means is, how this project gets built is really, really, critical, and there's a lot of discretion there. There's a lot of discretion also in how the governor, how the mayor, how the city are partners in this project, right? And that is separate from the State Department of Highways. That is the governor herself as an individual. That is the mayor himself with all of his executive power, and the City Department of Transportation. We're excited about bringing the deputy mayor and the City Department of Transportation out to the Cross Bronx in the next few weeks. The same day that the second highway was announced to no longer be an option was the day that we were planning a roundtable between city and state electeds and agencies to address, how do we build this project with all of the right partners and solutions at the table, not just the State Department of Highways, right? The rest of the conversation. And that's what happened with the Sheridan redevelopment. And so, yeah, I'll say that. And I'll also, since this is the last question, I do want to just acknowledge a couple of other partners, in particular, Riders Alliance, Transportation Alternatives, really critical allies to us in this process, and the team, right? I think for us, the future is Victoria Toro, Daniel Reynolds, the highway warrior that's a veteran, Elena Conte, our board members, Joan and Nilka. These are the folks that have been doing this work every day, who are losing sleep thinking about this every night. And so I just want to acknowledge that as part of our, next steps in our future work with this.
So much. Well, that was the last question for me, but now I have the opportunity to pass it to the audience. And I think there's a mic going around. Oh, there's a mic right there. And
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, I'm Gibson. I'm the chair of the Urban Planning Student Association here at Wagner. I think this was like a great conversation that I know talks a lot about the involvement and the need to have the community as part of the process and the discussion, when clearly the state seemed to have taken this as more of a technical problem initially. And I think, Tiffany, you put it well when you said it's probably lower in the ladder of priorities that they have. And so speaking, especially as someone that wants to work or works as an urban planner and wants to make some of that change, is part of the process that should have been involved all earlier on. But I feel like a lot of the conversations we have in class tends to focus on how the community is involved in these certain steps that are technically planned, like in the public comment process, but clearly these problems come up over and over and over again regardless. And so I guess, is this just an expectation that should be seen as a lot of these projects come about, or is there something fundamentally that can be changed about how communities are involved in problems that arise that just come up through maintenance and past issues when someone that wanted to change the community just did so willy-nilly? It's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I can start, which is great because I was going to answer Renee's last question and say the same thing, so thanks. We need more creativity. We need more creativity in our professions. We need more creativity from planners, from architects, from engineers. And in addition to creativity, we need you to hang on so that you can actually lead from the org chart. And I say it like that because you can lead from anywhere. You can lead from the seat you're sitting in right now. Many parts of my career that I'm known for are things that I accomplished when I was the most junior person on the team. So leadership and star quality actually have nothing to do with an org chart. But when you're starting to talk about funding, when you're starting to talk about like concrete legal decision making, when you're starting to talk about spending millions and billions of dollars to influence generational change, we need more creativity. And the creativity is not just ideas, it's also lived experience. It's also your cultural background. It's also if you're a first gen, it's also if you physically move around differently. It's all of those things. To Assemblymember Séptimo's point, I'm very comfortable saying the uncomfortable things out loud to the point where that is why people ask me to speak on a panel. I will tell you today that in the state of transportation, generally in our region, the top two levels of decision making are largely white. Whether it's the public sector or private sector, it does not matter. There's very few women and or people of color who are in those seats. And there's a lot of structural reasons as to why that is. But what that means is you're sitting here, you're a student, you're sitting here, you're a professor, you're sitting here, you have an opportunity to influence and push back as an advocate. We need people in the decision-making chairs who have more opportunity to be creative.
If that's okay, just one more. I feel like the point on creativity can't be understated, and I want to recognize ORG as the architects with a different precedent, right? A European precedent that helped us think about alternatives. I want to acknowledge the Point CDC as the folks that bring creativity and community together, and those were critical partners. I also feel like the truth is that without folks stepping up to the plate to be on the not on the offense, not just on the defense. This time we were on the defense, but community groups like ours and like our partners always have a plan. There are endless plans that are on shelves and unfunded because we are not resourced and working with practitioners, working with architects, engineers to advance those plans with power. And so just to say that, we have a climate justice task force that we lead in the Bronx, but there are many iterations or versions of proactive solutions coming from community that are not resourced and supported in a way. So just to address that point.
I can ask? Okay. Well, I just wanted to know, what can we do as young people in the community to support, or help the place that we live in?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the first thing is there are two things. One, remember that you are already powerful. When you're a young person, I think people's favorite phrase is like, youth are the future. And that's true. You are future leaders, but you're also leaders today. You are an expert in what is happening in your community today because you live there, you experience it every single day. And because you experience those problems in your community, I'm sure that you have ideas for solutions. because you're experiencing them every day. And so the way that I did it was that I walked into a nonprofit in my community that I'd walked past a few times that I knew was doing something. I wasn't sure what. Walked in and said, "Hey, what do you guys do here?" And they explained it to me, and then I got involved. And so one of the things that I think people don't appreciate is that any nonprofit, any government office, I was interning in the congressman's office. I started when I was 15. All of these places are understaffed. We have too much work and not enough people to do it. And so if you are motivated and you're excited to make your community better, walking into one of those places and saying that, you will get an opportunity. So you're already on the right path by thinking about how you can do it. Now it's just taking the step into action. But it's also in rooms like this, going up to some of the adults that you heard speak or people that you saw get shouted out and say, "Hey, I want to get involved." If they can't pull you into their office, they will send you somewhere that you can do work. But it's maximizing opportunities like this, but also believing in yourself and remembering that like you are an expert and you're ready to go right now and just finding the place to go do that work.
I would also add, your generation has a different set of tools than our generation, and that's really important. You heard me talk earlier about media and how sometimes your audience is of one or sometimes it's of many. Social media is such an powerful tool. The idea that even just the language that something has gone viral did not exist for me when I was in school, right? And we've seen what that means. We've seen revolutions literally take place on TikTok. We've seen videos, on viral that were on TMZ are now on like, regular news channels like CNN or MSNBC, plus or minus, but they're still on national TV, right? We've seen, you're able to literally talk to people your age 24 hours away from where you are in time right now. Do not underestimate the fact that you have access to tools, often for free, that are very powerful, and you can create your own audience. So I think that as you are stepping into these spaces, you are talking to adults, you are asking questions, you are exactly that. You are powerful, and that your tools to really make influence are different, but still really important.
Yes, I'm Michael Myers. I'm the president of the New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question to the panel is, look, Robert Moses is a very, very famous guy, infamous. He's still known. He's still known, although he's dead and buried. But when he was living, he was a very powerful person. But he worked in concert with, in partnership with people who agreed with him. I mean, just in terms of urban renewal, not just transportation, but urban renewal. So I want to know, who were his partners then, and did they accept this responsibility and accountability for what, quote unquote, Robert Moses did in terms of transportation and housing? And how do we expose the conditions of political convenience and partnership that contributed to, quote unquote, in quotes, Robert Moses?
Yeah, this is a great question. I have to say I haven't gotten a question like that before, so I'm going to do my best. I think history is both unfair and unkind, right? And I think whoever wins, quote unquote, who has the most impact, who has the most power, has the opportunity to have their legacy preserved. And I think the people who were fighting on the ground, because I promise you, the same communities that are fighting on the ground today were fighting on the ground back then too, but their power dynamic was not the same. Their opportunity to be on social media, to be on TV, to have direct access to elected officials, even to just get an education, just as an example, because I say it all the time, the first Black person to get a graduate urban planning degree, that wasn't until like the early 60s, and it was a gentleman at MIT. That's not that long ago. My parents are older than that. So I think when you think about who had access, who had influence, and how history remembers them, my call earlier for more creativity, for more viewpoints, for more people, more diverse experiences in leadership points exactly to that, so that we can have these uncomfortable conversations and peel things back and say, hey, my organization did harm here. And this is what this harm has looked like over generations. And now that we have an opportunity, because the infrastructure built at that time is now at the end of its useful life, let's open that up, let's address it, let's call the thing a thing, and let's move forward. And I think that you're starting to see that, or really continuing to see that in our more recent classes of elected officials statewide. And I think it's probably incredibly galvanized and represented in the recent mayoral campaign, right? Like, this is the first time in my career that regular people are excited talking about a bus, right? Like, people in my space, we love all modes and we love the bus, but normally people don't listen to us when we want to talk about the bus. So I say all that to say that I think as more of the world and more of our decision makers and our advocates are arming themselves with different tools, becoming less afraid to have these uncomfortable conversations, are holding our elected officials accountable, whether it's by voting them out or stepping into the role to become an elected official themselves, that this is an opportunity to make sure we are not rewriting things. And so I think this is a perfect example of a project where you had an agency that moved forward with a quote unquote standard plan as usual because it was available, but you had a more educated, a more dedicated, a more diverse, and a different level of powerfulness to a set of advocates who were willing to say the uncomfortable thing and push back.
Okay, 4 more minutes. Okay, I see one hand here and one hand here.
Hi, thanks so much for this. This is really very enlightening. I'm here because after 50 years of procrastinating, I finally decided to read The Power Broker. And I am 700 pages into an 1,100-page book. It's one measure of Moses's destruction capability that I'm 700 pages in, and I have still not gotten to the construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway. So my question is essentially about case studies. This notion of connecting communities when you're essentially dividing them and connecting affluent communities at the expense of poorer communities. This notion of alleviating traffic by building another bridge or a parkway, when it's been proven 50 years ago that adding only adds to the traffic, it doesn't add to the solution. So I'm wondering if there's anything you can point to, because I'm kind of hoping after 50 years of this injustice being amongst us, that there have been other successful examples of pushing back in the expansion era. There's all of these things which are nearing 100 years old at this point are in need of repair. So are you drawing in your activism on any stories of successful turning back of the pages to restore community to New York City in various ways? That's really the heart of my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that comes to mind for me immediately is congestion pricing. When I was at the point as a teenager, I testified at city council hearings about congestion pricing. And it's amazing that it's here now and the impact. And it's not a resistance to a physical expansion, but I think it's exactly what you're talking about prioritizing the needs of community over things that just are more uncomfortable for some other parts of community, and sort of flipping the balance of the scales for once. And so I know a lot of people are not fans of congestion pricing. I will forever be a champion. But that's the one that comes to mind immediately for me. I don't know if you guys have some that you want to throw in.
Well, I just want to weigh in and say that congestion pricing is one of the ideas that the point is still advancing as a way to address this problem right here. How do we use tolling to benefit communities that have suffered the harm of highway infrastructure? How do we, incentivize other routes using this type of mechanism? I think we've also talked about, waterborne freight as a way to shift and, investments from the private sector and the city in that area are hopeful and part of, what we've been advancing, as well as alternatives, regional alternatives.
Okay. I also just we've talked a lot about Robert Moses, and that makes sense, but there is injustice in every single system that you look at. And so he is an easy villain and the worst one and boo, boo, boo. But I think about the fact that Mott Haven doesn't have a green space in the whole place. It also happens to be the place in the city with one of the highest concentrations of residents who live in public housing. That doesn't feel coincidental, and that has nothing to do with DOT, right? And so I think he's an easy place to look to, and it's sort of calcified bad decisions that we can touch. But this issue exists in every single part of our government. And that is what I think where you get to like what we need to change is who has power and who do they use it for when they have it? How do you yield it? Who gets to share in it? Who do you share it with? Who do you platform? And that is not agency specific, right? That's a larger comment on our government and how we make policy and how we approach it.
Well,
On that light note.
I think we ran out of time, unfortunately. I know this is an amazing conversation, and I'm only cutting us not short, but sticking to the timeline because a few of us have to go up to a press conference in the Bronx to celebrate someone who does have power now and is using it to prioritize buses as a better way to get around. And so that's where we'll be. So I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists. Give them a round of applause. Thank you, NYU. Thank you to our amazing and illustrious Dean Trottenberg for having us and everyone who helped put this together. Thank you.